last episode, I made this bronze block prototype for the sailboat. Now, I'm a little bit behind in getting this video out for a couple of reasons. First off, the last several weeks, the last 2 weeks for sure, we've had sub-zero temperatures here in Illinois. In fact, one day with wind chill, it got down to a minus 41 degrees Fahrenheit. So consequently, I didn't spend much time here in the studio. Instead, I spent some time getting started working on the sails. So that'll all be coming up in a future video. But right now, we need to concentrate back on our bronze blocks. Now, one of the things that also set me back was there was a bit of engineering in order to figure out exactly how I was going to make these finished blocks. So the first thing I needed to do was to get some lignivite in order to make those shivs. Now, as it happens, I have inherited quite a bit. Some of you will remember from past episodes that I inherited this lathe from my grandfather back in about 1961 when he passed away. I spent many hours as a young boy sitting on a stool and watching him turn things on the lathe. And in fact, this tool is probably the first woodworking tool that I actually operated by myself. Well, one of the things that my grandpa Chet used to love to make were gavels like this one that he had made. Now, when I inherited the lathe, it had this piece in the headstock. So obviously, this is the last piece of lignivite or last thing he ever turned on the lathe. Along with these prized possessions here, there was a length of some lignivite, about 3 feet of it. And I had actually turned down this piece when I was probably 16 years old in hopes to make a gavel like my grandfather had made. Consequently, I never finished it, but I did finish some things like this that was a handle for a chisel, and I did this back in probably 1977 or so when I was in graduate school. So to get started, I'm going to use this piece of lignivite that I had turned down when I was a teenager. Now, as it turns out, when I measure this across, I probably can get about 6 shivs out of this piece of wood. Now, luck may have it that my sculpture professor, when her studio got broken up, she was able to gift to me a lot of wood. Now, one of the things was a whole bunch of black walnut, which is what all of the walnut that's in the Haven was from her studio. In addition to that, there was a piece of lignivite. So you can see I've got a pretty big chunk of lignivite here. In fact, the heartwood here measures about 6.5 inches, and it's about 24 inches tall. So I've got more than enough lignivite in order to make a few shivs. So the first step will be to turn down some of those shivs. I got the dimensions for the shiv from the MIT website that houses the Herreshoff collection of drawings. Joseph from my online clinic found this document, HH.5.05390, while doing some research. It's difficult to see the dimension table. However, for a 5/16 inch diameter line, the shiv should have a 1 1/8 inch outside diameter. Lignivite has a very distinctive aroma. While turning these shivs, I was taken back to my grandpa's shop, smelling that fresh cut wood. It was really a nice memory. After cutting loose the shivs, I fastened them in the metal lathe to square up the ends. While I had the shiv chucked, I drilled the center with a letter F drill, which is 7/1000ths more than a quarter of an inch. After I finished the shivs, I got busy cleaning up the bronze castings. I processed several castings at a time to streamline the process. I used the belt sander to flatten the back. I rotated 3 at a time, placing them in water to keep them from overheating. I took a 1/4-inch bronze rod and turned it down on the ends to 3/16 of an inch. By creating that shoulder, the spacing between the cheeks would be consistent. I've got all of my parts together now. These cheeks that I had made, I polished the back side of them, mainly because if I hadn't, it'd be like this prototype that I made, that there's no way to clean up the inside of it. So it also is going to help make this lignavite shiv slide very nicely in there, being polished like that. So as I had shown before, is I have 2 different pins here. One's a little bit longer, which is for the axle. So the way that this goes together then is to put the axle pin in, and then upper part. There we go. Now I haven't polished this part because once I peen over these pins, then I will grind them off. So there is no sense in polishing this until the final stage. So I'm going to take my hammer and by putting the pin on there and peening it down, that should keep it, that shoulder in there on that little pin will keep it from collapsing upon itself. I had a comment about why I was using the flat side of a ball peen hammer instead of the curved side. Well, the curved side is you don't have as much control, and if you were making a rivet, that would make sense to do that. However, what I'm wanting is for this to mushroom out evenly all around. So that's why we use the flat side. So anyway, for that viewer, that's why I'm using the flat side of the ball peen hammer. So we'll put them together. That's got to lock together real good, so I'll grind that off and get it polished up. Well, I've got it all polished and finished up, and you know the little shiv moves very nicely in there. So let me show you how this sits on the boat. So I've got the boom just setting in place here, and I have a shackle here in my hand. So I've got the boom setting here just in place to demonstrate this. So what I would do is I'd put this shackle through the block, and then the block would get this shackle in here like so. Of course, I put a cotter pin in there to secure it. Then what would happen is this particular block would be for the main sheet, and it would come through here like so. So you can see that it runs perfectly smooth. Now there's a lot of different ways that these blocks need to be attached to the boat. So let's take a look at the plans and I'll show you where some of those different locations are. So here's the gaff sail plan for the Haven, and the gaff plan is what I am using. So let's start here at the top, which is a block that goes here that is for the gaffed bridle. It then comes down here to the peak halyard, and then this line would continue down and be tied off on a cleat down here on the foredeck, on the bulkhead. The other block that is here would be this one, and that is to raise and lower the jib, and again it would come down and cleat off down here in the same location. Now if we go over here while we're talking about the jib, there's a block here. This line starts over on the starboard side. It comes up to that block, and then it comes down into another block, and then that sheet comes back to the helmsman. So we have two blocks right there. So you can see they both are going to be, all these are going to be fastened in a different way. And the next one up here is a block that will raise and lower the gaffed boom, and it starts here at that block, goes down to a hook that is on the gaffed boom mouth, and then it goes back up to this block and then down to that same location here on the bulkhead to raise and lower that gaffed boom. The other thing here are the blocks that need to be operating the boom when you're tacking either starboard or port. This is the block that I just demonstrated installing right here. So how this works is this is not needed. This is not a block that is needed. So the line will originate here. It'll come down to a block that slides across the traveler, back up and across the boom, and then it comes down here to the cleat that is on top of the centerboard trunk. Now, to understand all of these, I've pulled off of Jim Reineck's website a picture of some of these different blocks. So if you're building a haven, I highly recommend you getting your bronze fittings from Jim Reineck. First of all, he does first-class work, and it's really beautiful, beautiful bronzes that he produces. And beyond that, he's a super nice guy, and from my understanding of people that have worked with him, he's very attentive and answers any questions that you have on the phone as far as like where what block goes where. Now, me making my own blocks is really for a couple of reasons. The first is I just really enjoy making things, and the fact that I have casting experience, this seemed like a very natural thing for me to do, to make my own blocks. The other thing is when you go to Jim's website, you'll be a little astounded at the price of some of these things. So my intention is to give everybody an idea of how much work really goes into producing these blocks. So I'm going to put a link to Jim's website in the description. If you're interested, there's a lot of great information there that will help in anybody that's interested in rigging a sailboat. So if we look here at this sheet of the different types of blocks that we will need for the haven, you can see that here's that hook that I had mentioned that actually goes right here at the throat of the gaff. And then you can see there are several on here that we will need on the boat. This is your basic shackle with a link. It's very similar to what I had just done. There's a traveler link so that this hoop here is a little bigger and it can travel across the traveler bar. There's a throat hanging block. Now, sometimes these are actually called a cheek block. And the cheek block actually goes right here and is mounted directly to the mast. And then finally, one of the things we'll need is a span hook block. And span hook, it holds the gaff bridle in here like so. I have picked up a small bronze piece at the Wickford Marine Consignment Shop when I was out there last summer. And so this will then go up here by the gaff bridle like so, that cable will run through there, and then there'll be a block attached here. So if you kept track, that means I need 9 blocks for the boat. So I've got 1 down, so I need 8 more. So instead of you watching me make the same block over and over with just a little bit different head on it, I thought that I would show you how I'm going to make one of the specialty blocks. And that is the cheek block, or what Jim refers to as the hanging or the throat hanging one. Now, one of my boat building guys from my boat building boot camp course is building a haven and is finishing it up and has just recently installed the bronze that he procured from Jim Reineck. This is an image of the hanging throat block that John installed on his mast. You can see there are several special brackets needed, and it has a becket for the standing in of the line. Now, it would require some special casting parts to it, so I've decided that there's more than one way to skin a cat, and I'm going to design my own with some materials that I already have. So this is the basic design that I've come up with, and that is to use one of my cheeks here, and then the sheave would be in here like this, and that what I'm going to do is use some flat 1/8 inch bronze sheet that I have for a back plate. So of course then it'll have the axle through here and a pin up here, and then we'll attach it to the mast by using some screws. Now, as I had mentioned, that the line for this for the gaff halyard, it begins here, and in some cases there's a becket that would be attached here to the block. So what I'm going to do instead is I'm going to put one of the a spar flange on here that have a little eye in it, like so. And then the line can start here and go down, that will go down to the hook that'll be attached to the bottom, to the gaff throat, and then it'll come up and go over the block and then down so that it can be cleated off. So what I need to do is gather a few materials to make this. Here are my materials. Now I've already taken one of the cheeks and drilled a hole in it and finished off the back side to be ready to be polished. And then I have this piece of 1/8 inch thick sheet bronze here. And of course I have a shiv. And then this is that spar flange that I had mentioned that can sit there on the mast, and then the line can come in here and be knotted so that that is where it'll start. So this is an extra one that I had cast, so I'll just have to clean it up so that it can be then mounted just below this on the mast. So what I need to do is to come up with a little bit of a design here on, I'll trace this out and then put some tabs on here so that I can then attach that to the mast. I've also already turned a couple of little pins so that one of them will be here for the shiv to run on, and then the other pin will be up here to hold the top of the cheek out where it needs to be. So first thing I want to do is make a pattern of what I want that to look like. Well, I am really happy with the way that turned out. So let's see what it looks like on the mast. So I've got the masts all laid out here, and the plans call for the throat halyard or cheek block to be 27 inches from the very end of the mast. And we'll center the 27, the axle of the shiv. I've got the mast sitting here so that it's exactly in line with where the tendon for the mast step is. So it should sit right there. And then I already polished up a spar flange, which we'll put right there. So I'll get some screws and attach those. I've tied the line in here so you can see how this will work. So it'll start here and it will go down to the gaff jaws, and then this is where you will pull that gaff jaw up that will pull the gaff boom up. This works just like that. Well, that's it for this episode. Now I'm going to continue to cast and fabricate the remaining 7 blocks for the boat. But in the meantime, we're going to need some sails to get this rigging finished up. So in the next episode, I'll be completing all of the sails for the Haven. So as always, thanks for watching. And remember, if you're going to make it beautiful.